Thank you for having me. It's great to join you.
So I'd like to kind of pare back and kind of really get to the core of this issue here, because there's so much confusion around what big tech can and can't do and should or shouldn't do. The essence of the issue comes down to whether these are platform companies or publishers, right? If they're platform companies, they basically have to be an open forum. And they get Section 230 protections for that. If they're publishers, which intervening in political speech looks like being a publisher, then they don't get those protections. Is that a good way to kind of look at this issue? And what happens now, do you think?
Well, I think that is a good way to frame it. And Section 230 is a special immunity from liability that Congress passed decades ago, really at the start of the Internet, to try to encourage the growth of the Internet. At the time, it was a fledgling and nascent industry. Now these are the corporate behemoths across the globe. It's a very different dynamic. And when Section 230 was passed, big tech was providing a neutral public forum. They aren't anymore, and we've been seeing big tech get more and more aggressive on censoring and silencing voices they disagree with. That being said, the last 24 hours marked a dramatic escalation, and they've crossed a new line. It started yesterday, where both Twitter and Facebook blocked a story from the New York Post alleging evidence of corruption concerning Joe Biden and his son and Ukraine. And the New York Post wrote the article, and Twitter prohibited anyone on the platform from tweeting or posting the article. In fact, they blocked the New York Post itself from tweeting their own article. Then today, the Twitter doubled down. There was a second story from the New York Post alleging corruption, again in the Biden family, this time concerning Communist China, and they're receiving millions of dollars from Communist China. Twitter once again blocks anyone from tweeting that story. And it's the first time I'm aware of big tech being brazen enough to directly censor a major media outlet and to block anyone from communicating a story published on a major media outlet.
Right. And Senator, here's the thing about this that's so fascinating to me. Are they not then inviting the loss of Section 230 protections? So if they're acting like publishing companies, aren't they going to be stripped of those protections? Section 230 only applies to online platforms that are not moderating content. The only exemption you get is if the content is literally obscene or otherwise offensive. Offensive does not mean political speech. So don't these actions mean they shouldn't be covered under Section 230?
Well, I think that's absolutely right. And I think you're seeing growing congressional skepticism of the monopoly power exercised by big tech and their willingness to abuse that power. And so this afternoon I announced, along with Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham, we together announced that on Tuesday the Judiciary Committee will vote to subpoena Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, to testify before us next Friday and explain why Twitter is engaged in active election interference, that they are actively trying to suppress major media coverage. Look, the New York Post has the fourth largest circulation of any newspaper in America, and Twitter is preventing anyone from posting now two stories putting forth evidence of corruption of Joe Biden. And by the way, if anyone disputes the evidence, that's actually what free speech is all about. You know, we were talking about Section 230 a second ago. If the New York Post stories turn out to be wrong, they can be sued for defamation. They can be hauled into court, and they're subject to damages.
Exactly.
Twitter isn't. Twitter gets immunity under Section 230 that the New York Post and every other media outlet doesn't get.
Right, and that was an extension of the fact that back in the day, libraries and bookshops and newsstands couldn't be sued for defamation. So these platforms exist at scale because they're basically seen as giant newsstands. They're treated the same way under the law. But if they're not acting in that same way, they lose those protections, don't they? I mean, my question is, is it a prosecutor now? I mean, what next steps would be taken to say, okay, you are literally claiming that you are acting in a manner that a publishing person would act. Therefore, you could be liable for all the content on your platforms. And again, investors, the shares are only down about 2% today, but this would potentially undermine their entire existence. So the issues are potentially enormous here. If these companies say, yes, we're publishers, wouldn't they lose those protections?
Well, I think there are a host of avenues it can come from. It's not likely to come from a prosecutor because it's not likely to be a criminal action. But it is likely to come from, number one, trial lawyers suing them for content, for decisions they're making that are biased and unfair, and I expect trial lawyers will be making the argument that they've abandoned the protections of Section 230. But number two, from the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission, and I have spoken repeatedly with the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General, the Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust, the Chairman of the FTC, the President of the United States, the Vice President, all about directing the enforcement authority of the administration to go after big tech and stop them from abusing their monopoly power. And they are monopolies under the antitrust laws. They are abusing their monopoly power, and they are doing it to censor views they happen to disagree with, to silence those they happen to disagree with, and now, just 19 days out from an election, to deliberately and blatantly interfere in the election.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.